I'm Tammy Adams, for those of you who don't know me. I'm CEO of Madoc Public Library, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Fallis. Mr. Fallis is the author of The Best Laid Plans, which is now a CBC miniseries, The High Road, Up and Down, and most recently, No Relation. And yes, we have every one of those items in the library, in case anybody's looking for them. He is the winner of numerous awards, including the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor in 2008 and the CBC Canada Reads in 2011 for his debut novel, The Best Laid Plans. With a bachelor's degree in engineering, careers as a political staff member and consultant, and experience building a hovercraft, Mr. Fallis is a truly fascinating individual with many tales to tell. Prepare yourself for laughter, and please join me in welcoming Terry Fallis.
Nothing like pressure. Prepare yourself for laughter. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. You know, I am a member in good standing of the Write What You Know school of writing. My first couple of novels were about politics. As Tammy kindly mentioned, I worked in politics for a number of years on Parliament Hill and at Queen's Park. Certainly had some views on politics that I wanted to air. I don't mean partisan views. I'm not very happy with the way we practice politics, but rather than writing a rage-filled non-fiction polemic that I think nobody would have read or published, I thought, why don't I cloak my ideas in a funny story and put my thoughts in the minds of some characters you might come to care about towards the end of the story. So that's what I did. And there are lots of other pieces of my life strewn about those pages. Tammy mentioned the hovercraft. When I was 15, a classmate and I designed and built a full-size hovercraft. So I know far more than any sane individual ought to know about hovercrafts. And if you've read either of those first two novels, well, now you know more than any sane individual ought to know about hovercrafts. My engineering colleague here would appreciate the detail into which I descended when describing the hovercraft, because I know that much about that hovercraft. There was an older woman with Parkinson's disease in those first two novels named Muriel. My grandmother had Parkinson's disease, so I know what that's like. There's some engineering content in there. I have an engineering degree. There's a couple of grammar aficionados in those novels. My father engendered in his offspring a love of the English language, and we would sit around the dinner table on Sunday nights and debate the geopolitical implications of the split infinitive and other important and pressing matters. It did help to cut down on dinner guests. So I tend to write about what I know. In my third novel, Up and Down, I brought together my 25 years of experience in the public affairs, public relations, agency world with a very long-standing interest in the space program. I've been a space nut since I was 9 years old and watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. So in this new novel, I probably know less about this new novel than I did about any of the other three. I decided I wanted to write about a writer, but there was a nub of the idea that came to me. It really came to me in 1989, if you can think back that far. I had a client meeting downtown at a law office, and there was a lawyer in the room who introduced himself to me and said, "Hi, my name is Brian Mulroney." And it was not this Brian Mulroney. It was this Brian Mulroney, just a guy whose name was Brian Mulroney, who practices law in downtown Toronto, and he still does it. And I remember thinking as I shook his hand, what must your life be like? Because Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister at the time, and I think was almost at his nadir of popularity. And I thought, this poor guy, he can't go to his son's soccer game or to a cocktail party or to a conference, client meeting, without having to introduce himself as Brian Mulroney and then endure the comments that would surely follow. So I didn't stand there and think, wow, this would be a great idea for a novel. I just tucked the idea away in my mind. And I thought I would write about a writer who lives with a famous name, just to try and explore that idea. So I could have chosen Well, let's see, I could have chosen William Shakespeare as the principal character, or how about Charles Dickens? Maybe Chuck Dickens he might be. Or how about F. Scott Fitzgerald? But I thought, you know, those writers are really known more for their works than for being a writer, in a way. When you think F. Scott Fitzgerald, you think The Great Gatsby. You think Charles Dickens, you think Oliver Twist or A Tale of Two Cities. And then it occurred to me that there is a writer who seems to transcend his works and is known first and foremost simply as a writer. Anyone guess who that might be? Who's the most famous writer in the world, if you were to ask anyone?
Farley Mullen.
Farley Mullen.
I'm in Canada.
Maybe. How about this guy?
Hemingway.
Yeah, it'd be Hemingway, I think. I think lots of people couldn't name a single book written by Ernest Hemingway, but if you were to ask them who's the most famous writer in the world, they would say Ernest Hemingway. He sort of transcends his own writing. He is just this iconoclastic writer. So I thought, why don't I write a novel where the narrator is a struggling writer who has the name Ernest Hemingway. And it's not spelled the same. It's got an extra A in Ernest and an extra M in Hemingway. So it's not really the same name at all, but it certainly sounds like the same name. And you're thinking, come on, can you really make that plausible? Can you really write a novel that seems realistic with a guy who's a struggling writer and his name is Ernest Hemingway? Come on. Well, let me try and tell you the story that leads to him having that name, that rather famous name. We have to go back to the 1890s in China. This guy's great-grandparents were missionaries in China. Their last name was Hemingway, with 2 M's. And every 2 years, they get to come out of rural China and recharge their batteries back in their hometown of Boston. And on their way back to Boston, in 1895, they got to stop in London. They were catching a sailing ship to go from London to Boston. But they had this one night in London in 1895, and somebody gave them tickets to see a play. And the play was at the St. James Theatre. They loved the play. They laughed. They thought it was the most extraordinary play they had ever seen. It affected them so much that the festivities continued after the curtain fell, and 9 months later, their son was born. And they named him Ernest, E-A-R-N-E-S-T. Has anyone figured out what play they saw? Oscar Wilde? The Importance of Being Earnest. It was such an important moment in in that year for them. They just loved the play so much. Frankly, they probably would have loved a Punch and Judy show, having spent 2 years in rural China without any exposure to their own kind of culture. But they loved this play, and in honor of that night when their son was conceived, they named him Ernest, E-A-R-N-E-S-T, as in the play. So this young guy, Ernest Hemingway, gets a little bit older, and when he is 16, 17, he decides not to follow his parents back to China, but to stay in the United States. And he gets a job in the garment district in Chicago, the rag trade. And he works on the line making men's underwear. And men's underwear in those days, they weren't really made very, very well. The waistband was very thin, and it wasn't stitched very strongly to the rest of the garment. It would often pull away. They just weren't very comfortable. So he cooked up this idea to have a much wider waistband and this very innovative double stitching that reinforced it and made it more comfortable and much stronger. Now, instead of giving this idea to the company he worked for, he decided to start his own company called the Hemingway Company. And he started to manufacture this new garment. And his breakthrough came when somehow he managed to land a contract with the U.S. Army to provide underwear to the soldiers who were amassing now to go and fight in the Great War in 1917. So it gave him the volume of sales that allowed him to build a bigger manufacturing facility, which he located in the rail yards in Chicago, which at that time and to this day is North America's largest rail hub. So if you were going to try and locate your factory near a transportation artery that would allow you to most efficiently get your products across the nation or the continent, Chicago, building it right next to the Chicago rail yards was the thing to do. So that's what he did. And around that time, there was something called the Ripper. This was the bully's tactic of choice in the schoolyard. The bully would walk up behind their unsuspecting victim, grab the waistband of the underwear, and yank it up really hard. And of course, the underwear back then was just so terrible that the waistband invariably pulled away from the garment, and it was called a ripper. Well, with the introduction of Hemingway's underwear, with a much stronger waistband, it morphed into something called the hemming. And it was called the hemming because the waistband didn't rip away. It just stayed fast, and you just yanked the underwear up, and it was quite painful and caused ephemeral sopranos, and it was very painful. Luckily, the hemming term didn't hang on for long. Eventually, it was supplanted by the term the wedgie. So Ernest Hemingway I really did put the wedge in wedgie, thanks to his reinforced waistband, a more comfortable product. So he built his factory near the Chicago rail yards, and it has been a fixture on the landscape in the United States ever since. In fact, skip ahead to 2011, the Hemingway Company is a big, bustling operation now, providing underwear, only men's underwear. That's all they do, is make men's underwear for export to other countries and certainly throughout the United States. And there was a tradition started with the first son, the firstborn son of this patriarch of the family. He took over the family business, but also he was named Ernest Hemingway, and every firstborn son thereafter has been named after the patriarch. Ernest Hemingway II, Ernest Hemingway III, and our narrator, Ernest Hemingway IV, or EH4, as he's known in the novel, or Hem is really how we refer to him. So one tradition is that they kept the name intact. The next tradition is each firstborn son became CEO of the Hemingway Company. Unfortunately, our narrator, EH4, or Hem in the novel, doesn't want any part of running the family underwear business. He got a master's in English and creative writing. He is worked for 15 years at a Madison Avenue advertising agency. He's struggling to write a novel. What a terrible burden to bear when you're trying to write a novel with the name Ernest Hemingway. So he's got all this pressure. He's got to live with this name. His father wants him to come back to Chicago. He lives in New York now. Come back to Chicago to take over the company. He doesn't want to do that. So it's a real struggle. So he does a bunch of things to help pass the time, because he gets laid off from his job on page 1 of the novel. I may even read you that section when I'm done yakking here. He gets laid off. He's having a very bad day. In fact, the day the novel opens, he loses his wallet, he loses his job, and when he gets home from being laid off, carrying his garbage bag filled with his personal effects, the elevator opens into his apartment building, and there is his live-in girlfriend of the previous 4 years with her bags packed, and she's not going on vacation. So he's having what I've called the bad day trifecta. He's also been in therapy for many years, trying to wrestle with writer's block. He has writer's block. He wrote 11 chapters of his novel. He cannot write a single word more. He's just blocked. So he's working with his therapist on that. He's also working with his therapist on life with a famous name and strategies to deal with that, because he can't say his name, whether it's at the DMV when he's getting his driver's license replaced or the video store, and without eliciting these comments about his name. So he's dealing with a lot of the issues. He also has an irrational, unexplained fear of small dogs. Little dogs. I mean, really, St. Bernards, no problem. In fact, he would protect you from a charging silverback gorilla or a mountain lion or a grizzly bear. But if it's a Pomeranian or a Shih Tzu, he's out of there. So we don't know why. He doesn't know why. You may or may not find out why by the end of the novel. But first and foremost, he has writer's block. And he thinks he's figured out why he has writer's block. He thinks it's the ghost of Ernest Hemingway, the writer, in his head. Because Hem, the narrator, doesn't like Ernest Hemingway's writing. Ernest Hemingway, the great writer, writes very spare, barren, succinct, clean prose. It's almost like he's writing it for a grade 7 student or something like that. And the narrator of the novel, Hem, really likes to splash around in the English language. He likes to use long, flowing sentences. He comes from the why use 6 words when 25 words will do school of writing. So he thinks it's Ernest Hemingway, the ghost of Hemingway, in his head, blocking him, saying, you know, edit your prose, cut it down, make it cleaner, and he just can't write anything. That's his explanation, and to rid himself of this writer's block, he tries to excise every aspect of the writer, Ernest Hemingway, from his life. So he takes all of his Hemingway books off his bookshelves, anything to do with bullfighting, hunting, or fishing, or Key West, or anything like that, and he puts it down in his storage locker, trying to remove any vestige of Ernest Hemingway, the writer, from his life. But that's not really working. So he kind of gives up writing for a little bit, and he moves on to another idea. He wants to meet other people who live with famous names. He wants to have that common bond with somebody else who has a famous name. So he puts an ad in the New York Times and invites people to a meeting and books a room at the Manhattan Y. And on a Thursday night, without knowing whether anyone will show up, he arrives at the Y, and 9 or 10 people drift in to this meeting. And as he explains it, he has what he calls name fame. He's not famous. His name is famous, so he has name fame. And he bonds immediately with this group of people, and they have such a good time at their first meeting, talking about their common plight, that they agree to play on a baseball team that the Y organizes, the baseball league that plays in Central Park, across the street from the Y. So the Name Fame support group becomes the Name Fame baseball team. And this is the batting lineup for the Name Fame baseball team. You've got Jesse Owens, you've got Peter Parker, you've got an Italian boy named Mario Andretti who has failed his driver's test 4 times. You have Diana Ross, who sings quite well, but only when she's really drunk. Marie Antoinette, who actually runs a bakery cafe in the village called Let Them Eat Cake. There is a rather muscular East Indian fellow with an anger management problem. He has a hair-triggered temper. His name is Mahatma Gandhi. So Clark Kent, Professor James Moriarty. Who knows who Professor James Moriarty is? Daniel, who?
He's against Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes, arch nemesis, that's right. Not everyone knows that, but he's famous to me because I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. So this group really seems to bond and get together as they work through their common issues of living with a famous name. And lest you think I'm making all of this up, there are people living in New York with these names. That's why, one of the reasons it's set in New York. I needed a big enough population base to support the likelihood of people living with these famous names. Anyway, after one of their baseball games, they usually go to a bar and drink, but Hem is so discouraged with his writer's block that he just goes home. And the other members of the group go to the bar and they feel bad for him, and they think, you know, they think he's going about his writer's block problem the wrong way. They think he shouldn't be trying to push Ernest Hemingway out of his life. Their theory is, if you're scared of spiders, you will only overcome that fear if you hold that spider in your hand. So they think he ought to confront Ernest Hemingway, not hide him away in the storage locker. So they have this idea, and they knock on his door that same night at 10 o'clock. Three of them, sort of emissaries from the group. It was Marie Antoinette, Mahatma Gandhi, and James Moriarty go to visit him. And they propose an idea. They call it the Ernest Hemingway Exorcism World Tour. And the idea is that one of them will accompany Ernest Hemingway, the fourth, Hem, on this journey. One of them on each leg of the journey. And the journey is, well, it starts in New York, and of course, its first port of call is Toronto. Who knows why Toronto? You go to Toronto. Toronto Star. Toronto Star. Hemingway wrote for the Toronto Star in the 1920s. He wasn't there for very long. He did not like Toronto. He did not like working at the Toronto Star. But they moved there briefly so that his wife Hadley could give birth to their son, thinking that the healthcare system, I think, was a little better there. And their son, I'm not even sure what his formal name was, but he was always known as Bumby. Who would name their son Bumby? I don't understand it, but if you read Hemingway's memoir about his life in Paris, he always refers to him as Bumby. And I pushed Bumby in the carriage down the street. Oh, nice name. Anyway, so shortly after the child was born, they went back to Paris. So Paris is the next leg of the journey. Then to Pamplona, Spain. Then to Key West, Florida. And finally to Ketchum, Idaho. And then back to New York. That is the Ernest Hemingway Exorcism World Tour. So Toronto, I mentioned already, worked at the Toronto Star. He actually lived in this apartment on Bathurst Street, just north of Eglinton. I've been to it. In fact, I think I took that picture. When they first got there, he lived in this home on the corner, almost at Sherburne and Bloor. It's now a hotel, but they've set up the room the way it was when he was there. So it's kind of neat. So there's a reason that he would go to Toronto. Paris, of course, in the 20s, Hemingway, it was really when he became a writer. He spent a lot of time writing in the cafes, hanging around with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein, and a little bit of James Joyce, Morley Callahan, the great Canadian writer. They all spent time there in Paris together, so Paris had to be on the list. Then Pamplona, if you know anything about Ernest Hemingway, you know that he loves bullfighting. He went to Pamplona in the 1920s and was just overwhelmed with the whole notion of bullfighting. It really seemed to appeal to his macho sensibilities. In fact, you can see Hemingway right here in this photo, sort of taunting a bull in the bull ring at a time in the festival where amateurs were allowed to step into the ring. So he kept going back over the years until he was quite an old man in his early 60s to Pamplona. So Pamplona had to be on the list. Then Key West, of course. He spent a good number of years, I think 9 years of his life living in Key West, Florida, and writing a good part of his body of work in Key West. He lived in this home, which you can, in fact, still tour. Anyone toured the Hemingway's home in Key West?
Yeah, you do.
You did good. Well, you would think I would have in preparation for this novel, but I have not. But I did take the virtual tour online, which is not quite as good, but I've seen what the rooms look like. So Hemingway spent 9 years writing, fishing, drinking, and after that he managed to fit in some drinking. He was, he was a pretty self-indulgent figure. So after Key West, the last stop on the journey is Ketchum, Idaho. Who knows why Ketchum, Idaho is the last stop? Well, it was Hemingway's last stop. He lived there for 2 years before committing suicide in this home. And he was self-indulgent in life he was self-indulgent in death and self-centered in death. What a terrible thing to do to your wife as she is upstairs in the bedroom. She hears the thump of the shotgun and comes down to find her husband sprawled on the floor in the vestibule, and you can imagine the scene. And I thought, what a terrible thing to do. So anyway, it's a bit of a downer, isn't it? So that's the tour that he went on. And I did do quite a bit of research on this online, and I tried to decide whether I was going to go to Ketchum, Idaho, or to Paris. So anyway, when I got to Paris, so my wife and I did go to Paris for a little bit. I've been to Paris several times. It's one of my favorite cities. And it was such a literary ferment back in the 1920s. And in this photograph, I'm actually writing sentences for the novel in Les Deux Madocs, which is a famous cafe in Paris where Hemingway wrote. In fact, I'm sitting in Hemingway's place, where his favorite seat to write. It's commemorated by a photo of Hemingway right above it. So I sat in that very seat and wrote sentences from this novel there, and it was quite special. In fact, has anyone read the novel? Probably not yet. Oh, Tammy has. So Tammy knows that there is a scene that unfolds in Les Deux Madocs, which I hope was a fun scene to write. I think it's sort of a funny part of the novel. So I was writing that scene while I was sitting in Les Deux Madocs. Anyway, that is that. Meanwhile, back at the company, while he's on this tour trying to rid himself of this writer's block, there's some corporate espionage going on. There is a fight for the leadership in the company, the ownership of the company. And all of this Hemingway has to deal with when he comes back from his trip, because he's still expected to take over the company. And Hem is trying to push his younger sister forward. She has an MBA, finished at the top of her class. Her name is Sarah. She is incredibly smart. She is incredibly tough. She is the perfect person to take over the family company, except she's not the firstborn son and has the wrong anatomy. And their father won't even consider it, and he's not focused on it at all. So all of this comes to play towards the end of the novel as we try and figure out what will happen. So it's a lot of fun. So does Hem get over his writer's block? Does he finish his novel? What other questions? Does Mario get his driver's license? What happens at the Hemingway company? Does Hem figure out his fear of small dogs? Well, these questions and more will be answered in the novel, but I'm not going to tell you the answers. Why don't I read you something from the novel? Those of you who would rather listen to, oh yeah, the novel came out a couple of weeks ago, and it says it's up at number 5. It's actually at number 2 on the Globe and Mail bestseller list now, which after 2 weeks, which I'm thrilled. So we'll see tomorrow morning. We'll find out whether it's dropped from number 2 or whether it's hanging on. But for those of you who would rather listen to the novel, I am podcasting the entire novel, the audio version of the novel, chapter by chapter, as I have all of my novels. They're available for free on iTunes or on my blog. So you can go to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast, or just download all the episodes, and you can hear me read you the novel. If you suffer with insomnia, it's something you might want to consider. I think you'll enjoy it if you've liked the first 3 novels. I'm kind of a one-trick pony. So why don't I read you a little bit from the... do you want to hear from the beginning, or do you want to hear something about Hemingway's visit to Pamplona, or what would you like to hear? Will I start at the beginning?
Yeah.
Then I don't have to set anything up. All right. So this is from chapter 1 of the novel. What's in a name? For many, nothing. For some, not nothing, but not much. For a very few, blessed or cursed, it's everything. I'm one of those few, and if you're wondering, I usually count myself among the cursed. When I turned 40, I lost the desire and even the ability to sleep in, so I was an early riser. Yet at 7:45, I still wasn't the first into the office that morning. I heard him as I crossed our marble lobby, past the futuristic reception pod where Angela and her headset would soon be stationed. He called out to me from down the hall. "Morning, Ham. You got a minute?" Bob was standing just outside the corner office, the corner office, his corner office at the end of the corridor. This was not good news. Bob was never in before 9:30, and when he eventually did arrive, it was to start a work day that was almost always devoid of any real work. Bob. 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 I've never really liked the name Bob. It's just so short. Simple, primitive, unrefined. In fact, I have a theory on the name's origin. 6 million years ago, when the early hominids first discovered their vocal cords, I think the sound Bob may well have been among their first harsh guttural utterings. Shortly after grr and ah would have come Bob. Short, simple, primitive, unrefined, much like Bob himself. Conveniently, I disliked Bob as a person as much as I did his name. We joined the New York ad agency, McDonald Clark, within weeks of each other nearly 15 years ago. But we've been on different trajectories ever since. Over the years, I rose through the ranks as if I were sauntering up a gentle slope, stopping often to lounge at patio rest stations along the way. But soon after we started, Bob seemed to board the space shuttle, docking with the corner office after what seemed to me like a very short ride. How it happened so fast? No, how it happened at all was more a mystery to me than Bigfoot. I still cannot fathom how Bob parlayed his principal assets of incompetence, paranoia, and mediocrity all the way to the top. But there he was, McDonald Clark's general manager, waving me into his palatial enclave with an expression on his face that suggested his next words just might be grr and ah. On the other hand, despite his shortcomings, I'd be thrilled to have a name like Bob. "Sure, Bob." I turned and followed him in. He led me to the couch and easy chair at one end of the office, far away from his barren desk where very little work was ever done. I took a spot on the couch, lowering myself into what felt like upholstered quicksand. I sank in so deep that when I stopped, I could almost rest my chin on my knees. I wondered how I was going to get back out. Bob sat in the chair across from me. "So, Ham, how have you been?" Just fine, Bob. You?" Awesome, thanks." Cue awkward silence. Bob shifted his position in his chair. I tried to shift my position, but the couch simply wouldn't let me. "Well, I guess you've heard the rumors," he continued. "Actually, Bob, I've been here too long for that. I make it a point never to pay attention to stray rumors or anything else I may encounter in these hallways. If I see a colleague crying in a corridor, or yelling at an intern, or moaning in a bathroom stall, I quickly make a show of checking my watch, turn around fast, and head back the way I came. That's my policy. So no rumors have reached these tender ears." "So you really haven't heard anything? No rumblings? Nothing?" "Not a peep, Bob. Should I have?" His face clouded. "Come on, Ham, you're not helping. We plant those rumors for a reason. They help condition the staff and prepare them for bad news. Strategic rumors are an important part of our internal communications program. You're a senior guy, you've been here a long time, you should know that." "Well, I'm sorry, Bob. Had you flagged and tagged them as strategic rumors from the corner office, I probably would have paid more attention." "Shit. Bob, I'm a copywriter. I sort of work on my own. I just follow the brief and try to think up the right words and how best to arrange them. That's what copywriters do. I don't really hang out much with the account teams. I'm generally oblivious when it comes to office gossip." "Shit. What's this all about?" Bob sighed, then looked at the ceiling as he spoke. "You're out, Ham. It's over. We have to let you go. Today. Now. I'm sorry." I laughed. Well, it was more of a chortle. "You're kidding, right?" I looked around the office. "Where's the camera? This is for the Christmas party, right?" I could tell from his face. No, this wasn't for the Christmas party. I just looked at him for a moment as the news settled over me like ash from an angry volcano. Bob, I'm shocked. I don't understand this. I'm hurt. You could have at least given me some warning. Shit, man, I floated the balloon last week. You seem to be the only one in the agency who didn't pick up on it. Come to think of it, in the last few days, folks have been kind of giving me the cocked head, arched brow, sad eyes routine as they hustled by. Bob, I've been here 15 years. I've won awards. You promoted me last year and gave me what I thought at the time was only a modest raise, but still you did give me an increase. Hem, calm down. Calm down, that was a surprise. Incarcerated in that couch, how could I look anything but calm? I could only move my upper body. I guess I may have been waving my arms around a bit. I am calm. Calm and flabbergasted. Calm and furious. Calm and apoplectic. What possible rationale can you have for firing me? Man, we're not firing you, we're just letting you go. We're thanking you for your years of service, giving you a generous settlement, and parting ways. That's all. It happens all the time in the agency world. Well, it's never happened to me, and you still haven't explained why. Man, come on. You really don't know? You're a long-form copywriter. You're a relic. This world has changed. In fact, it changed a decade ago. I'm amazed you hung around this long. Everything is short and punchy now. We live in the 140-character universe. Ad agencies don't need long-form copywriting anymore. We held out as long as we could. I'm sorry. But I'm good at my job. I'm in on virtually every new biz pitch. My writing has won the agency awards. I'm good at my job. I'm great at my job. Come on, Em. Don't fight this. Don't make this difficult. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and held it out to me. Em, you've got a huge package. Well, kind of you to say, Bob, but I'm really more interested in the settlement you're offering. I deadpanned. Perhaps I shouldn't have deadpanned. Bob was befuddled. I opened the envelope. The check was for the equivalent of a year's salary. Wow. It's well above the legislative requirements. Don't bother trying to negotiate. This is as much as I could get for you. If you choose to push back, the offer will be withdrawn and you'll receive the bare legal minimum. Bob said this last part like he was reading me my Miranda rights. I know I should have fired back with both barrels blazing, but I really wasn't good at this. I was out of things to say. I had nothing. Hem, think of this as a gift. You've got at least a year to do what you want. You can finally write your novel. Think of this as freedom. Freedom? Yeah, freedom. I wanted to swear like they do in the movies, but I just couldn't get it out. My civility instinct prevailed. Hem, you gotta go see Marlene. She has all the paperwork. You need to sign it all if you're going to keep that check. He said this last part in a whisper, almost as if he were talking me in off the ledge. Pop back in here before you go. I nodded and tried to get up. Bob, do you mind? I reached out my hand. Sure, Em. He pulled me up and out of the couch. I'm going to stop there. Thank you. I'm delighted to answer any questions that you might have, if you have any. So take the least likely character in a certain situation and plot them down into it. So the first two novels, who was the least likely member of Parliament to stroll into the House of Commons? Well, how about a 60-something Scottish mechanical engineering professor with wild hair and a long beard that he carries half of his meal in, who doesn't want to serve? And yeah, that would work. So my third novel, Up and Down, who's the least likely person to win a citizen astronaut lottery when they're looking for sort of a lumberjack type, good-looking guy with a beaver tattooed over his heart and a canoe paddle in one hand and hockey skates over the other shoulder, who's very polite and says "A" once in a while. That's who they're looking for. So who wins the lottery? How about a 71-year-old bush pilot lesbian doctor who lives in a glacial lake in northern BC? Yeah, that could work. So who's the least likely struggling writer I could write about? How about a guy with the name Ernest Hemingway? So I try and look for characters who give me plenty of potential to explore issues, but also to have some fun along the way. So
So is this, have you ever sort of laying on the couch and thought there's something autobiographical about this character?
Well, there is probably something autobiographical. Not so much what happens to them, but the personality and the
Not
voice.
the character, the engineer that writes novels.
Yeah, well, exactly. But what I tend to do is write in my own voice, which I think is good advice for writers who are new at writing or newer at writing. You want to write where you're in your own wheelhouse, where you're most comfortable. And so, those of you who have read all the novels, if you haven't noticed, if you think about it, the narrators sound remarkably similar across the novels. The same kind of tone, the same kind of a bit hapless, a bit helpless sometimes, a bit hopeless sometimes, a bit accident prone. And the voice is the same, and it's my voice. And I'm very much, in a way, like some of those characters, although nothing that has happened in those books has really happened to me. But it's easier for me to write in that voice because it's my own voice. Now, the dialogue with other characters obviously is not my voice, but the narration tends to be my voice.